Friends who are gathered here in this space, welcome. Friends who are gathered watching this live stream and then later will be watching the recording, we're so glad that you're participating in this evening as we have a conversation of the journey of hope that we experienced in Poland. Before we go any further, I'd like to introduce Reverend James Howe as he leads us in prayer and welcome.
How are you? All right, friends, thank you for coming. Obviously, this matters. Churches, we do a lot of things that matter. This really matters, and it's big in all of our hearts. So let's bow our heads and pray. Gracious God, we know you grieve things that go on in the world far more than we do. You know all of the sorrow, all the pain, all the personal stories, the heartache, it's a mess. It breaks your heart, so it breaks our hearts as we are close to you. We thank you that we're part of a church that cares. We're thankful that we're part of a church that's able to do some things that we are able to do. Help us to live into that responsibility and fulfill that responsibility faithfully, zealously, enthusiastically, so that your children are helped, so that we're some piece of bringing about peace in your world. So be with us this evening. Open our minds and our hearts. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Hey everybody, it's great to see such a large group on such a dreary night. We really took bets as to whether there'd be 10 people show up tonight. So we're glad you're here, those of you in person and certainly those of you who are joining us remotely. Journey of Hope. I just want to speak to that name we gave this program and our trip. It certainly was a journey of hope for us. We hope to learn, we hope to discern, and we hope to meet people where they are. And certainly we had that experience. Just as important as that, we met people who are on a journey of hope far greater than the one we experienced. People who have been forced out of their homeland with war, and the hope they show and demonstrate, the optimism, is truly amazing, and certainly something to be an example for all of us. Just, let's see if we can make this work here. Okay. Okay, but that's not a problem. It worked 10 minutes ago. What do you think? What's the problem there?
Help.
I think we may need some technical support here. Oh, here we go. Finally. Okay. Not sure what that's about, but glad we're getting started here. We flew into Warsaw, and from Warsaw we spent a night, and hopefully you can see it on the screen, but we left after a day and a half and went to a town called Przemyśl. But to get there, we stopped at another town called Puławy. We spent time there meeting a couple of ministers, and we'll talk a little bit about that. From Puławy, we traveled to Przemyśl, from there to Krakow, and from Krakow back to Warsaw. Over a 3-day trip, that's over 500 miles of road time, not counting all the time we spent with those in the country. And to say we had early mornings and late nights would have been quite the understatement. Can you hear me okay? In Warsaw, okay, thank you. In Warsaw, we spent most of our time at the Central Methodist headquarters for Poland. And it's an interesting place. The guy who runs it is actually the general superintendent of Poland. It's different than here. I guess we don't have general superintendents in the U.S., but over there, there's a whole country with roughly 40 churches, and they have a few district superintendents, but they have one person who is overseeing all of them, and so he's called General Superintendent. When you walk in the door, excuse me, you're struck by this a little bit because there's this poster on the wall, excuse me, with John Wesley in Polish, and you think, well, what does that mean? Well, obviously it doesn't take a true Methodist long to figure out that it's really a very John Wesley Methodist saying, and I think we're all familiar with it. Within the Methodist headquarters building is the church in Warsaw, the United Methodist Church of Warsaw. This sanctuary seats about 100 to 125 people, but at the height of the refugee crisis, something on the order of about 100 people were spending the night in this room. The church opened their arms, as did the country, and it was quite impressive. The group we went with consisted of people from two churches. Of course, there were the folks from Myers Park and around that were involved, and also people from Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City. I think most of you are likely familiar with that church as Methodist, and we were certainly there on behalf of our own congregations, but we were also there on behalf of the Methodist Church. What we report back will not just go to our churches, it'll go to churches around the country. Within their building, they're actually in the process of upgrading or creating 3 living spaces for refugee families. And they're under construction as we speak and not far from completion. So the church has housed people in transition, but it's also going to house people who are there for the duration. Leaving downtown Poland, we go to the suburbs to an actual Methodist church, or former Methodist church, that was built, interestingly enough, by the Methodist Church South back in 1920. And that building still belongs to the church, but it's rented out to a medical equipment company. Even with that, they have agreed to allow refugee families to live in their building, or in our building that they rent. That is the actual sanctuary from when it was a church. Refugee on the left is a young lady who has her child, and her husband is back in Ukraine fighting. The lady on the right, who's actually speaking with the general superintendent, whose name is Andrew, works for the medical equipment company, but she has become a refugee. She is from Ukraine, went to Warsaw to go to university, got a job there, and planned to go back to Ukraine. The war has obviously stopped that. Her mother has joined her there, and like most, her father is actually in the army in Ukraine fighting. From there, we headed to the Expo Center, which is really an amazing place. If you take the Charlotte Convention Center and multiply it by 20, you'd have their Expo Center. It's a common European thing. And they have 5 massive exhibit halls there. 3 of those 5 halls are filled with refugees most nights. And by the way, the Poles tend to call them guests. The term refugee is certainly used, but they prefer to call them guests, which is a nice touch. Welcome Center. This just gives you some idea of the size of these structures. On the right and the left there are 2 of the 5 halls, and they're truly massive. This is one small area in one of these halls, and you can see the cots there. They don't look that occupied right now. That's simply because refugees come and go very quick. It's a transition place. They're distributed from here. Right now, the average stay there is about 4 nights. And another thing with respect to the lack of people you see in this picture is that they're coming and going all day. Buses leave in the morning, buses arrive in the afternoon, so in the time of day we were there, the population tends to thin out a bit. Just to give you some idea, within this center, this is an additional building that houses a hospital for refugees, for guests, and a warehouse that supplies all their needs. From the Expo Center, we traveled to Pulavi, and that's a relatively small town. We met with the pastor of the United Methodist Church there, and another gentleman who is the pastor of the United Methodist Church in Lviv, Ukraine. He and his wife's sister and her husband are refugees. And they are fortunate to live with a third sister who's a Pole who lives in this home. But their attitude is great. The hospitality was incredible. They offered us drinks and food, and one thing I'll mention we'll come back to, they made homemade lavash. Does everybody know what lavash is? It's a wonderful bread from that part of the world, if you don't know. And we ate most of it, but we kept one piece because we took it with us to do communion that night at another town. Really a cool experience. This is the host and her sister. The lady on your right is a refugee. Her sister lives in the house. They are both incredible artists. They sing and play instruments very well. And they played 2 songs for us, which were really beautiful. One was I Pray to God to Save Ukraine, which is, it would make you emotional listening to them, and Do Not Be Afraid. And one of these ladies, when she finished, tears were just pouring down her face, but it did not interfere with her beautiful performance. So we leave there, drive another 3 hours to the border, and we are at the border at a town called Medica, which is very near Przemyśl, which is a more significant city. Just shots from the border. The one on the left is the actual auto border. The one on the right is the reception center. Refugees or guests do not stay at this reception center. They're received there and then distributed. There are buses coming and going constantly, and there are all kinds of organizations there in these tents who are there to provide support to refugees. Sometimes it's moral support, sometimes it's logistical support, sometimes it's French fries and a piece of chicken, but they are incredibly hospitable. And they're from all over. I mean, you see them from Israel, you see them from Arab countries, you see them from China. It doesn't matter. It's an amazing sight. This is kind of interesting, and I neglected to mention it with respect to the Expo Center, but people who have pets, house pets like cats and dogs, they don't say leave your pets at home. They allow you to bring your pets along, and you could see the reception center is even hospitable to pets. The Expo Center, by the way, actually has a veterinarian on the staff to help refugees who have pets. So we leave the border, we head to the town of Przemyśl, and I'd love to just spell this word for you. It's pronounced Przemyśl, but it's spelled P-R-Z-E-M-Y-S-L. And I'm not sure how that works, but it does. The picture of the church there, outside of the church, that is a 300-plus-year-old church, which is a Methodist church, and the guy standing on the steps is the lay pastor of that congregation. On the right is a picture of their sanctuary with the district superintendent and Adam Hamilton is the other person in the picture doing communion. And we use that same bread we had at the farm. One of the important things here, and I neglected to mention this earlier as well, that old church built by the Methodist Church South and this building are both meant to be houses of hope. They're trying to upfit these so that they can house refugees long-term until this crisis ends, and then they want to use those spaces for things like Christian education, vocational training, language skills, etc., to help people do better in terms of a job. From there, we head to Krakow. And if you've never been, I highly encourage it. It's really an incredibly beautiful old city, which we had the luxury of about 30 minutes of walking around in the old town before we had to go again. Anyway, this is a sanctuary in the church there. And this was a really cool experience going there. It's kind of like you're worn out, you've been beat up for 3 days, and this was a nice last stop on our trip. On the left is the pastor of this church in Krakow with the general superintendent, and on the right is a couple who were really incredibly beautiful people. He's the pastor of one of the Methodist churches in Kyiv. And she is his wife. She's also a minister, and she's a pediatrician. And he doesn't speak very good English, but she spoke to us most of the time, and they were very moving with what they had to say about what's going on in their country and where their parishioners are. And interestingly enough, basically every pastor we talked to from the Ukraine is still holding services. They're not holding them live, they're holding them online. But they are all still holding their services every Sunday. And the pastor from Kyiv suggested that he had parishioners in several countries who go online to watch services on Sunday. It's kind of different than doing it in Charlotte, North Carolina, I think. So we have this ministry here, this prayer shawl blanket ministry. Many of you know about. We've got the head of it here tonight, I know. And having those prayer shawls available was really a great experience. This is obviously Nathan with this pastor and his wife and their 2 daughters putting prayer shawls on them, which was really a touching experience for everybody there. So what are the takeaways from this trip? What's important to really remember? The guests are filled with hope and optimism, interspersed with despair, which is pretty cool. You can see the looks on people's face sometimes. There's sadness, there's grief, etc. But there's also hope and optimism, and it really lifts your spirits to see people going through so much that still have that strong hope. Poland has radical hospitality beyond anything I think we can imagine. They, as a country, have opened their doors with, open arms. Bus transportation, train transportation, whatever, is free to Ukrainian guests. They don't pay a thing. People throughout the country have opened their homes, opened their churches, opened their schools for refugees to live. I asked the general superintendent at one point how much of the population is against this. Are there political parties who oppose it? The answer was none. The country as a whole is united in support of this, which is sort of something I guess we could only wish for in our country, but it's really something. There are about 2 million Ukrainian refugees living in Poland right now. That number has gone up and down some, and it does tend to vacillate, but there are about 5 million Ukrainians who've left the country and are living elsewhere, and they are literally living all over the world, primarily Europe. But Poland is attractive because it's close to home. And these folks want to be safe, but they want to be as close to home as they possibly can. We ask everywhere we went, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? Supplies, etc. And we heard over and over again, anything we need we can buy here, and if you send goods, they get tied up in customs. Funds, though, money, they can spend easily, and it's easy to get it there, and they can buy what they need to support people there. So that's kind of an important element. Financial resources are the key.
Hello, I'm Manolo Betancourt. I'm the owner of Manolo's Bakery and a very good friend of all of you. I wrote down what I want to say, so would you, Nancy, please? Yesterday, the president of Ukraine started a speech in this way. Oh, I keep forgetting my glasses. I need it. Guests in the house, God in the house. That's what people in Poland like to say. I would like to share with you what I saw in Poland. Not again. I saw how Europe is getting united. To me, they are not going to allow anyone to try to repeat what happened in World War II. The dark and cold war is not going to cover the yellow fields and the blue sky of Ukraine, the land of the free. I saw a lot of love and gratitude to USA. Everyone that I had a chance to talk, they shared their gratitude to our country. Before the war, had the impression that USA was the judge of the war. Now they say the USA is the savior of the world. Now I understand why we are in the land of the free. Humanity is stronger. I saw an army of volunteers from all around the world, people of all races, colors, beliefs, and religion, united by the pain of one nation. Everyone is helping and finding help to all of those in need. Mass destruction bombs are killing people. Humanity is getting stronger than ever. Looking for God. I saw the unification of faith. People who didn't believe in God now are looking for God. I saw how churches are open to anyone and no believers visiting churches. Sad how sometimes tragedy unites us, but God is helping us to find peace and faith in our hearts. One goal. I saw the unification of political parties with just one goal, help Ukraine. In Poland, political arena, both parties agreed to open Poland to Ukraine refugees. Whatever they need, no matter it's too much, too little, they will have it. Profit over human values. I saw big corporations changing profits for human values. Any Ukraine refugee will travel around Europe without any expense, warm meals and train extensions and just the board. They will have it. Help another bakery. I saw a Polish baker leaving everything behind in his home city in Poland to get into a war zone to help another bakery. I saw bakeries around Ukraine and Poland giving free bread to those in need. Our guest. I saw Poland's soul in every single street. I saw Ukraine's flags and peace messages in every single street. They called them our guest. Poland will not allow their neighbors to suffer. United. I saw how Ukraine is getting united as a country who was divided in too many ways. Political, religion, social, and so on. Now is united on the same flag and under the same pain. I saw God's presence in Charlotte. I saw God's presence in Charlotte. It has been a blessing to see our community here in Charlotte get together to support us. Children writing support letters to the Ukraine guests. Elderly people at my bakery giving me 50% of their salaries in order for me to give more support to those in need. Immigrants and non-immigrants. Rich and poor, we all got together in this. I want to say thank you to Maya Spark, United Methodist Church, for being part of this journey and for letting me to share this journey with all of you.
I'm Nancy Watson. I'm privileged to be one of the pastors here at Myers Park. And I want to tell you what a privilege it was to go to Poland, but to go with the people that we went with. Manolo, and you'll meet Brian in a minute, wonderful, wonderful people. My takeaway from the trip was two things that are intertwined. The first was hospitality. You've heard everybody talk about hospitality so far. But the people in Poland are some of the most hospitable people I think I've ever met in my life. Their attitude is, you know, what do you need? If we have it, you can have it. And if we don't have it, we'll help you find it. And they truly get the difference between service and hospitality. Service is what you do for someone. Here's money. Here's a blanket. Here's food. Service is what you do for someone. Hospitality is how you make them feel about it. And so they understand hospitality. When they call the Ukrainians their guests, that pretty much tells you all you need to know right there. They treat them as guests. They treat them as friends. They treat them as brothers and sisters. And they do make it matter how the people feel about it. So the Ukrainians are not felt like, oh, you poor thing, you can't do for yourself, here, let us do for you. That's not it at all. They get the true gist of hospitality. And that hospitality has to do with connection. And that's a Methodist distinctive word that we could talk about a lot more, I think. But the connection was so obvious on this trip. Nathan mentioned it in his video. You know, the Ukrainian church reached out to the Polish church and said, help. And the Polish church said, come on. And then the churches here in the United States reached out to the Polish church and said, what do you need? And it was really amazing that every refugee, every guest that we spoke with, the first thing they mentioned was gratitude, and it wasn't gratitude for stuff. It wasn't gratitude for money or for food or for shelter. Thank you so much for your prayers. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for your solidarity with us. It is so important to know that we are not alone. And one of the things that I wanted to do when I went to Poland was to be able to look somebody in the eye and say, we care about you. And I was able to do that. And it was pretty special. And so that linked with hospitality, that's a huge source of hope for them. Much hope. And that's why you'll hear more about it in a minute, about these houses of hope. Hope for people who want to go home. Hope for people who want to continue their lives in the midst of horrible circumstances. So it was a real privilege to go and to learn and to be reminded about this gift of connection and this gift of hospitality that we share.
That's a tough act to follow. My name is Brian Arkwright. I'm a researcher in telehealth, telemedicine. I'd like to thank my wife for seeing an article about the church going, about Manolo going and connecting me with this group. Really an incredible group. I think a couple of things, I won't say too much, but one of the things, that connection and sharing that there are people in America that are caring about them, praying for them. Manolo brought over a lot of cards that children had made and dropped off at his bakery. And when he would give those to people, seeing their reactions, I think almost every one of them would well up and cry a little bit. And then they would take a picture, they would text it to somebody, they would immediately call a loved one, probably in Ukraine. And just to see those real connections and that raw emotion of what it meant. And then there was Adam Hamilton was with us, and he would often share that people in America were praying, people that we had flags up, that we had tape around trees. And the reactions that we got to those statements was just, they were almost didn't believe it. they were kind of like, really? People are watching, people really care about us, speaking for the Ukrainians. So I think that those were a couple of things that were really powerful to me. The other thing two other things that really stuck out was the key financial things, and that the point that they did make that you can buy everything over there in Poland. And walking around, it's a booming, European metropolis that just like Charlotte, quite frankly, and you can get everything at any one store, and it's quick and easy to get it right over to Ukraine usually. We found that out in the days that Manola and I and Oliver were kind of still over there for a couple days. We looked up items on the Polish Red Cross's website, and it's a lot of stuff. When you ask them what they need, I think that's the other thing we did. Everywhere we went, we asked them, what do you need? And we got very long, varied list everywhere. And you think about it, they probably need it. And they told you they needed it. So the Polish zloty, which is the currency over there, the kind of exchange rate is $1 US to about 4.5 zlotys. And I think when it really hit home for me, or how impactful for me, when we went to the supermarket and it was like a Target, and we just bought everything that was on the Polish Red Cross list. And then we ended up taking it over to the Polish Red Cross. A toothbrush was $1.29 zloty. You divide that by 4.5, that's about 25-30 cents. We can't get a toothbruch for that cheap here. And then if we send it over, we're paying a pretty big markup. So I think that was something that was, the exchange rate, the fact that you can buy everything over there, it really kind of put it into perspective of how far a donated dollar can go, and how powerful it can be, and how much good it can do. I think those are kind of some of my main takeaways. And healthcare-wise, the Eastern European culture is not really open to mental health and behavioral health. And we asked some very poignant questions of the pastors over there, how do they see coming out of this? And I think that when you get them talking, Jack mentioned it, there is a vigor there and a hope there, where they talk about the recovery, they talk about the comeback. And I think that they're gonna need all the help they can get, everything from mental health, behavioral health, to funds, et cetera. So that's all I have. Thank you. I was grateful to be on this trip. These people are amazing.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you all for sharing. Brian, speaking of connection, he's a member down at Providence United Methodist Church, so it was great to have him and just strengthen the connection that we have here in Charlotte. Now it is our Q&A time. We have Britt Yett and Kirby Gooden who are going to have mics. If you have questions for us up here, we'll do this for a bit. I am very, very serious about this. If you have a question, ask a question. Don't make a point, please. Just ask a question of what you want further information on. We've got the guys in the back ready to push mute. Just kidding. But just ask questions, and we'll be happy to field it.
Yeah, I'm curious about language. How many of the guests that you encountered spoke English? And another unrelated language question is how close are Russian and Ukrainian? Could they understand each other or not?
Yeah, so great question. English speakers that we encountered, it was impressive of how many did know English, like the two ladies that were shown at the Methodist Church of the South building. The one that was the 8-year university student, and she spoke great English. The mother spoke a little bit, comprehended more so. And then to your second question of Ukraine to Russian, there are a lot of similarities, but there are also a lot of differences, and we experienced that through translation.
How has the Polish healthcare system responded to the influx of Ukrainian guests?
Great question. We asked that, and Slavomir kind of touched on that a little bit, saying that they have a national healthcare system, that it wasn't that great, was kind of his words, and that they have had trouble kind of absorbing everything. And so I think a lot of those NGOs are pretty active. We saw a lot of them at the border, kind of offering healthcare in different ways. We did notice we got in the tents, I think, in the following days, and some of them are offering video healthcare, audio healthcare, these different NGOs. So, you know, maybe to answer that question, yes, it's absorbing it, but maybe not particularly well. And I think that everyone's trying to organize right now. Actually, Nathan put us in touch with a Catholic Relief Services individual, and they're talking a lot about how do we organize broad, large-scale counseling to kind of handle a lot of these, you know, individuals that have been in basements and really traumatically kind of impacted. And we talked with some individuals at the Spain embassy. They're also organizing. A lot of our conversations were around, you know, what can the United Methodist Church do to kind of help with the counseling and kind of, you know, PTSD types of needs and counseling needs that are coming. So there was really a sense of organization right now, of trying to organize and assess what's going on, but really to deploy some of those needs. So I think over the next couple of years, next couple of months, it'll be really interesting to see what is organized and who starts to lead it. Oh, the medical supplies. That's Nancy just reminded me. So I'm adjunct faculty at Wake Forest, and I reached out to them, or I was in contact with some Ukrainian nurses and doctors beforehand, and I asked them, what can I bring? You know, and I thought they were going to say masks, different things, and they replied tourniquets, which was kind of an eye-opening need, a very reality kind of check. And I brought over 1,000 tourniquets, and then I got an email while in the remaining days that Manola and I were there with Oliver from a contact in Spain who said, you know, if you're receiving this email, you're my go-to people. And it was the cousin of somebody that we were talking to, a Ukraine nurse, and they were a surgeon in a town about 200 miles from Mariupol. And this email was a long email, and they needed, I mean, it was a lot of kind of pain meds. It was a lot of prescription drugs. Just you name it, it was on that list. And it was actually, there was a little blurb from the surgeon saying, we're running out of everything. We need anything we can get. Here's our, you know, high needs list. And Manola and I, we met with some contacts that were going to bring stuff to the surgeon in that hospital. And so we gave them as much as we could, and they were going to organize and go to a doctor they knew in Poland to get some prescriptions. And so, yeah, it's eye-opening to kind of hear some of the stories. And one last one is we met a combat medic who was a Canadian soldier, kind of volunteering with the Foreign Legion. And then there was an American guy with him too, but the Canadian guy was a combat medic. And I asked him, I said, you know, I was told tourniquets, and he said, absolutely, we need tourniquets. And then he proceeded to tell us story after story. We ended up hanging out with them for about 7 hours that day, and just the stories were, you know, just almost unbelievable what they're sharing. But yeah, lots of. If you want to talk to me afterwards about healthcare, you know, just let me know.
I have a question about children being integrated into the school system, school-age children who are guests. What are they doing to help them? I mean, I understand the little ones won't need that, but are they being integrated into Ukrainian school system?
Yeah, so good question, Lenny.
I mean,
The children and the parents who I would say that want to, so experience this trauma, a lot of times the kids don't want to be separate from the parent. So there's not a lot of willingness to do that. But there's a willingness from the community to welcome them in and accept them in. They did project in the months to come and perhaps even the years to come that they were going to try to find jobs. And we're going to talk about this a little bit with the House of Hope in a little bit, so that the mom can go get work and the kid can go to school and try to create some normalcy into that space.
If I can add to that, the Polish people have already decided that their school system is open to taking these children whenever the time is right, whenever they're ready. And they've already made also a commitment that when Ukrainian children enter a Polish classroom, they are making sure that this child is not the only Ukrainian child in the room. That they're making sure that they are with at least 2 or 3 others that speak the same language, so that these kids are not isolated, that they are able to communicate with someone, even if the ages don't quite match up, but they're making sure that these kids always have someone they can talk to.
My question isn't about the people of Ukraine. My question is about one of the visitors. I have never heard of your bakery. Could you tell me more?
Oh, the bakery?
Your bakery.
Well,
I heard that your employees were so very generous. That's a beautiful thing.
Yes, it took me one. Well, you all know that we have a lack of employees in America. So in the last few months, I want to say the polite word, people that already had their pension, retirement, have approached to the bakery to work with me. And so far it has been the best thing ever to my bakery, best employees ever. And one time this person, he's like 72, 73 years old. Payroll day, he approached me, he says, "You still go to Poland?" "Yes, sir." "But everything right? Is everything okay with your payment?" He said, yes, everything is okay with my payment. I paid that day like almost $900 for his work through that period. And he opened his pocket and he gave me $500. It's so hard for a baker to make $500. When you carry flour, there are 50 pounds, and this person is 72 years old, and he had to carry that flour. It's crazy hot. The bakery gets hotter and hotter. So that really touched my heart. How many CEOs we have here in America making millions and millions and millions of dollars, and they haven't approached to any of us, to any organization, and said, "There's $1,000 for you." There is a guy here that I know in Charlotte, he's worth like $800 million. And he said to me, "I want to donate $1,000, but I need for you to start your nonprofit." I'm a baker, brother. Yeah, that's what I said. So that happened once with this baker. 2 days before I was going to leave to Poland, he approached me again and he says, "You still going?" "Yes, sir." He says, "There's another $500. So he's just an example for all of us to follow. So, and a story like that, like I was telling to the reporter, $5, $10, $500, $1,000, anything will make a huge change in Ukraine.
Back to what Nathan already mentioned, how are the children there? What did you see in the children and the youth?
It's really I think it's all over the place. You see kids who are just kids, and you'd think they were just another kid on the block in a normal set of circumstances, and you see other children with the saddest, most desolate look in their face you can imagine, and who knows, separation anxiety, just general stress. I mean, kids feel what their parents feel and transmit it to their kids. So, but it's all over the place. I don't think I couldn't generalize. Would anyone disagree? It's just all over the place. Some are great, some are not.
Hi, my name is Hazel Petrelli. I'm work in the press, Hispanic, and maybe Manolo, I need to help me for translating. I'm sorry for my bad English. And I have two questions, and mi primera pregunta es...
My first question is...
La comunidad hispana está muy involucrada con lo que ocurre en Ucrania.
Is the Hispanic community involved in what is going on in Ukraine?
Nosotros queremos saber de qué manera podemos ayudarles.
We want to know how can we help as an immigrant and Hispanic community.
Mi segunda pregunta.
My second question is,
¿Aproximadamente en cuánto tiempo ustedes tienen pensado viajar nuevamente?
when are we thinking to go back to Poland? Well,
Thank you.
My answers to the first question, believe it or not, I had an interview with a Colombian TV station yesterday, and they asked me the same question. I come from a war country. I was part of the military forces of Colombia, and I left Colombia because of the war. So very sadly, we didn't see that many Latino countries over there. And I don't know if because the distance, or I don't know if because we can say that we are a poor country, but Poland is not that different like any other big city in Latin America. So it's to the people all around the world that doesn't want to help, it's just because there's a lack of humanity, that's it. It's not because you are poor, because you live in a poor country, it's not because it's not coming from your heart. So that was very sad to see that there is not that much involvement from the Latino countries over there. And when we are going to go back, I want to, well, my wife is here, so I cannot mention. I absolutely, you know, we are helping to rebuild a bakery in Bucha. And that project is going so crazy good, so I want to be there for the reopening of this bakery. We want to reopen more bakeries. They talk a lot about how we are going to start rebuilding Ukraine. It's a huge sense of hope, and they're not giving up on hope, and they're not going to give up on hope. They keep talking how we are going to rebuild Ukraine, and that's where we all need to be together, helping them rebuild in Ukraine. So part of my job is rebuilding bakeries over there. I want to go also in winter time because there is going to be another kind of challenge for all of them. So that's my personal answer. But if they want to go earlier and I can go earlier, I will go too.
Thank you. Lisa?
Oh, it comes on. Oh, wow. The funds that you guys took over there, where did they go? What are they for? What do they need them for?
Yeah, great question. So we as a church sent over $50,000 a few weeks prior to us going, and that went to the churches, the general superintendent, Andrew, who we met, and Slavomir, who was our host superintendent, have a whole network and a structure headed up by a young woman who her dad is a Methodist pastor. There's a whole point of me saying all these connections. And they go to one of the 40 churches that are in Poland saying, okay, what are your needs? How many numbers of refugees are coming through? And they are delegating the money out accordingly, and just making sure that it's being used properly. The cash in hand that we took on the trip, because we took cash in hand, it went to helping purchase supplies immediately on the ground. It helped cover costs of our in-country ground transportation, and making sure that we get to all those places and the long days that we had. And so very faithfully used money. We have some money still holding, and I'm going to speak to where we're hoping to send that to next. Got time for one more question. All right, Craig, cue that movie for us.
W pierwszej wersji to miał być budynek przeznaczony na szkołę języka angielskiego.
In the beginning, it was dedicated for the English language school.
I też ten budynek miał być przeznaczony na jakieś zjazdy, konferencje, różnego takie.
And also it was supposed to be to organize any church gatherings.
A w tej chwili, wszyscy zobaczycie, jak to wygląda, ale jakie przeznaczenie budynku będzie, to ja nie wiem, to mój biskup.
Yes, now you can see how this looks like. So it was built in 1986. So how many years is it?
36.
36 years old. Yes. So and now we have to rethink. He asked me to say for what purpose we wish to use it. As I said, as you already know, we call this place House of Hope, and we hope to create a safe place for our guests from Ukraine, maybe several apartments, like 2-room apartments, so people with families with children may come here. And also it might be good to use it as a church for worshiping services, yes. Because you'll see soon our chapel, which is very small, maybe a little bit bigger than this room. So if we can finish this building, everything needs to be removed and put it new. You see, we have no floor. Windows needs to be new. We need to fix electricity. Everything. You will see how much work it requires.
So you can see that old building that they have such a great vision for and such a great passion and dream for. That's the building that they're wanting to turn into a House of Hope, along with the one that Jack was showing in the PowerPoint, that there was that yellow color. They want to rebuild it. They want to rebuild people's hope. They want to make generational transformation take place in those places, in those spaces and places. And they're determined to make it happen, and they're going to do it. So the rest of the money that we have on hand right now, we're going to send over directly going to make those into houses of hope. But that's a place that we as a church are going to stay committed to. Church of the Resurrection that traveled with us, they're going to stay committed with us on one of those houses of hope, if not both of them. And that's a place that we can say, hey, look, this is why the connection matters. This is why it's so important for the United Methodist Church to continue to thrive and understand the importance of what it means to be in connection with one another. I think about that, and you walk into that old brick building, and you see, I'm a kitchen guy because I love to eat. You see the kitchen dream, and you imagine all the little bodies that will be coming in there from their parents and eating meals and being satisfied and having a place to say, this is my home now. This is where I can have a life. This is where I can leave to go to school. This is where I can come home and do my homework if kids do that, and so forth and so on. The dream was there. and it's real. The other location of the House of Hope that we saw where the medical equipment is close proximity to Warsaw, about only 25 minutes outside of the city proper. Just the access that it has. Both of these cities have access to all the medical that we're seeing and we're not seeing for jobs and everything. All the Ukrainians that we encountered said, we just want to find a job. Every single Poland person that we spoke with said, we're going to find jobs for these folks. And so it's just this whole community coming together and saying, hey, we are better together in this space. I think one thing that I take away from the whole experience was towards the end when one of the women refugees that we encountered with their young child just said, I want to go home and tend my garden. I want to go home and tend my garden. And I think that can resonate with all of us. We cherish those places in our homes. We cherish those things that we call home. And so much has just been destroyed, and they're living in this devastation. But even by saying, I want to go home and tend my garden, you hear the hope in their heart. You hear the hope in their spirit. You hear and feel the hope in their presence. And to be met with a house of hope, to say, come and stay safely here until your country is ready. That's why it's important for us as a church to invest into these houses of hope. That's the generational transformation that will occur through us stepping up and saying, hey, we're here with you in this space. So thank you all so much for coming this evening. Thank you for giving of your time. Thank you for giving of your hearts. Thank you for giving of your resources. If you responded to the disaster relief, we're going to continue doing that and making an impact there. But let us now join in prayer. Gracious and merciful God, we give you thanks for this evening, for the gathered body here, for the gathered body in Poland and Ukraine, as they continue to journey together, as they continue to seek ways that they can bring your love in such a torrid time. So God, we continue to pray that swords and tanks and guns would be beaten into plowshares so that gardens can be enjoyed by all people once again. Lord, we just give you thanks. Amen.